Welcome to episode 85 of Norse Myths, Legends, and Folktales. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we continue the Saga of Thorstein and learn the history of King Kol Kroppinbak's family and how Viking might defeat Harek in parts 3 and 4 of Viking's Son. Tirus the Great was king of India. He was an excellent ruler in every respect, and his queen was a very superior woman with whom he had an only daughter, who was called Trona. She was the fairest among the fair, and unlike the majority of her sex, she excelled all other princesses in wisdom. The saga must also mention a man by name Kol, of whom a great many good things are told. First, that he was large as a giant, ugly looking as the devil, and so well skilled in the black art that he could pass through the earth as well as walk upon it, could glue together steeds and stars. Furthermore, he was so great a hand leaper that he could burst into the shape of various kinds of animals. He would sometimes ride on the winds or pass through the sea, and he had so large a hump on his back that although he stood upright, the hump would reach above his head. This Kol went to India with a great army, slew Tirus, married Trona, and subjugated the land and the people. He begot many children with Trona, all of whom were more like their father than like their mother. Kol was nicknamed Kroppinbak, in other words, humpback. He had 3 rare treasures. These were a sword so mighty that none better was wielded at that time, and the name of this sword was Angervadil. Another of the treasures was a gold ring called Gleser. The third was a horn, and such was the nature of the beverage contained in the lower part of it that all who drank therefrom were attacked by an illness called leprosy, and became so forgetful that they remembered nothing of the past. But by drinking from the upper part of the horn, their health and their memory was restored. Their eldest child was Bjorn, the Bluetooth. His tooth was of a blue color and extended an ell and a half out of his mouth, and this tooth he often in battles, or when he was violently enraged, put people to death. A daughter of Kol was Dis. The third child of Kol and Trona was called Harek, whose head at the age of 7 was perfectly bald, and whose skull was as hard as steel, wherefore he was called Ironhead. Their fourth child called Ingjald, whose upper lip measured an ell from the nose, whence he was called Ingjald Trona, the snout. It was the pastime of the brothers, when at home, that Bjorn the Bluetooth cut his tooth into the skull of his brother Harek with all his might without hurting him. No weapon could be made to stick in the lip of Ingjald's snout. By incantations, Kol the humpback brought it about that none of his offspring could be killed by any other weapon than by the sword Angervadil. No other iron could scathe them. But when Kol had become old enough, he died a horrible death. At the time of his death, Trona was pregnant and gave birth to a son called Kol, after his father, and he was as like his father as he was akin to him. 1-year-old Kol was so ugly to children that he was nicknamed Kol Kroppinbak, the crafty. Dis married Harek Ironhead, a blue berserk. She and her brothers divided their father's heritage betwixt them, so that Dis got the horn, but Bjorn Bluetooth the sword, Harek the ring, and Ingjald the kingdom, and Kol the personal property. 3 winters after the death of King Kol, Trona married Jarl Herfin, a son of King Rotmar of Marseraland, and the first winter after they were married she bore him a son named Framar, who was a man of great possibilities, unlike his brothers. Now, it seems to me, continued Vilfil, that you ought not to risk your life in a duel with this hell-strong man whom no iron can scathe. Not so, answered Viking. I shall run the risk, whatsoever may be the result. And Vilfil, seeing that Viking was in real earnest when he insisted on fighting with Harek, said, I can tell you still more about the sons of Kol. Vaseti and I were wardens of King Helloga's country during the summer seasons. We used to wage wars, and once we met Bjorn, Bluetooth, in Grenning Sound, the present Gronsund, between the Isle of Man and Falster in Denmark. And in such a manner did we fight that Vesti smote Bjorn's hand with his club, so that the sword fell from his hand. Then I caught it, flung it through him, and he lost his life. From that time on I have worn the sword, and now I give it to you, my son. Vilfil then brought forth the sword and gave it to Viking, who liked it very much. Viking then prepared himself, went on board a boat, and came to the hall of the king on the day appointed for the duel. There everything was sad and dreary. Viking went before the king and greeted him. The king asked him his name. Viking told him the truth. Hunvor was sitting on one side of the king. Then Viking asked her whether she had requested him to come. She replied in the affirmative. Viking asked what terms he offered him for venturing a holmgang with Harek. Replied the king, I will give you my daughter in marriage, and a suitable dowry besides. Viking gave his consent to this, and then he was betrothed to Hunvor. But it was the common opinion that it would be certain death to him if he should fight with Harek. Part 4. Then Viking went to the home, accompanied by the king and his courtiers. Thither came Harek too, and asked who was appointed to fight with him. Viking stepped forward and said, I am the man. Whereto Harek made reply, I suppose it will be an easy matter to strike you to the ground, for I know it will be the end of you if I smite you with my fist. But I suppose, answered Viking, that you consider it no trifling matter to fight with me, since you tremble at the very sight of me? Harek replies, Not so. I must save your life, since you go willingly into the open jaws of death, and do you smite first, according to the laws of holmgang, for I am the challenger in this duel. But in the meantime, I shall stand perfectly still, for I am not afraid of any danger. At this time, Viking drew his sword, Angervadil, from which lightning seemed to flash. Harek, seeing this, said, I would never have fought with you had I known that you were in possession of Angervadil, and most likely it will turn out as my father said, namely that I and my brothers and my sisters would all be short-lived, except the one bearing his own name, and it was a great misfortune that Angervadil passed out of the hands of our family. At this moment, Viking struck Harek's skull and split his trunk from one end to the other, so that the sword stood in the ground to the hilt. Then the men of the king burst out in loud triumph, shouting, and the king went home to his hall with great joy. Now they began talk about preparing the wedding feast, but Viking said he was not willing to be married yet. She shall remain betrothed, he said, and not be wedded till after 3 years. Meanwhile I am going to wage war. So was done, and Viking went abroad with 2 ships. He was very successful, gaining victory in every battle, and after having spent 2 years as a Viking, he landed in an island in the autumn at a time when the weather was fair and very warm. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back with more tales. many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.